The fluorescent lights of the grocery store hummed faintly above me as I set a modest vanilla cake on the conveyor belt. My fingers still smelled faintly of lavender lotion. From this morning, a small comfort in a day that felt ordinary until it wasn't. The cashier, a man with silver hair and tired eyes, glanced at the cake, then at me. His name tag read, Eli. He scanned the box, tore off the receipt, then leaned closer than courtesy should allow. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the beeping register. "Watch your daughter," he whispered. "She's not who you think she is." The paper trembled between us, as if it had absorbed the shock from my hand. I blinked at him, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me." But Eli had already turned to the next customer, sliding cans across the scanner, as if nothing had happened. His expression returned to polite vacancy, leaving me to clutch the receipt, like it was an accusation. I stepped away, my legs uncertain, the cake heavier than it should have been. The automatic doors hissed open, letting in a draft of damp Portland air. Outside, drizzle tapped against the concrete, and yet I felt hotter than I had in weeks. Watch your daughter. My Marin, my only child, my dancer with calloused feet and untamed hair. She was my pulse in human form. The one person I believed I understood better than myself. I should have gone straight to the car, straight back to the quiet apartment where I would cut the cake and drink tea alone. Instead, I walked past the shopping carts around the side of the store and slipped toward the loading bay, where trucks backed in to unload crates of produce. The sour scent of overripe fruit clung to the dumpsters. I found a narrow strip of shadow and stood very still. Minutes stretched. I told myself it was foolish, that Eli was confused, mistaken. My daughter had never so much as taken a library book past the due date without paying the fine. And then I saw her. Marin's red coat appeared first aflame against the gray drizzle. She crossed the lot quickly, her hood low, her posture tighter than usual. I knew her gait from miles away, the deliberate sway, the way she carried her shoulders. She wasn't alone. A man in a navy suit waited near the corner of the building. His shoes shone despite the rain. His hair slicked neatly back. He looked more like a lawyer stepping out of a downtown office than someone meeting in a supermarket alley. Marin reached him, glanced over her shoulder once, then pulled a small envelope from her bag. She pressed it into his hand with the subtlety of someone who had practiced. I leaned forward, my breath lodged in my throat. The man slipped the envelope into his jacket. Then almost carelessly he opened his coat wider to adjust his lapel. For an instant, a badge gleamed against the fabric, a police badge. He tucked it away before anyone else might notice. My knees weakened, and I gripped the dumpster to steady myself. Had I truly seen what I thought I had? My daughter handing an envelope to a cop as though they were partners in some private arrangement? The man nodded, once, then walked away with the unhurried confidence of authority. Marin lingered, checking her phone before slipping the device back into her pocket. She exhaled sharply, pulled her hood tighter, and walked toward the street. I stayed hidden until she disappeared from view. My heart thudded with the betrayal of both fear and love. When I finally moved, the cake box was damp in my arms, and the receipt still trembled between my fingers. My daughter had secrets, and now I was tangled in them. I stepped out from the shadows, the drizzle cooling my face, knowing this was only the beginning. When Marin was 8, she climbed the tallest maple in our yard and refused to come down. I remember standing at the base, my arms outstretched, my heart pounding. She grinned through the leaves like a mischievous sparrow and shouted, "You can't stop me, Mom." I didn't stop her. Even then, I knew my daughter's spirit was stitched together with defiance. She was fearless, stubborn, and forever in motion, the sort of child who would rather scrape her knees than walk the easy path. Her father used to say she inherited my backbone, but none of my patience. Maybe he was right. She grew into a woman who danced until her muscles quivered, who spoke her mind when silence would have been safer, who carried her independence like a shield. I used to admire it without reservation. Now, in the gray hush of 68, admiration wrestled with doubt. Evenings stretch long when you live alone. The apartment hums with the refrigerator's steady breath. The clock ticks loud enough to fill the silence. And sometimes I catch the neighbors giving me that look, a blend of pity and mild curiosity. They know I live on a pension that shrinks every month, that I ration my groceries, that I spend more time with crossword puzzles than with people. I don't complain. I've had my share of blessings. But solitude leaves too much room for thoughts I'd rather not have. That night, sitting with the untouched cake on my table, Eli's words looped through my mind. Watch your daughter. She's not who you think she is. I pressed my palms together as if I could squeeze the doubt out. Marin is good, I told myself. She is protecting someone. That has to be it. The envelope, the badge, it must have been part of something larger, something noble. Perhaps she was helping a friend in trouble. Perhaps the man was no ordinary officer, but someone she trusted. My daughter would never cross into dishonor, not when she was raised to know better. And yet the image would not leave me. Marin's hand, steady and deliberate, passing that envelope like she had rehearsed it. Denial is a soft place to rest, but it cannot hold weight forever. The more I replayed what I had seen, the more it scraped against the mother I believed myself to be, the mother who swore she knew every corner of her child's heart. I rinsed my teacup, set it upside down on the counter, and stood in the kitchen light longer than I needed to. My hands remembered the years of cleaning up after Marin's late-night dance rehearsals, of patching her costumes, of waiting in dark parking lots while she practiced one more routine. She had always carried herself like someone meant to defy gravity. But envelopes and badges belonged to a different world. I leaned against the counter and let the truth settle. My daughter was hiding something. Whether it was to protect or to deceive, I could not yet tell. Still, I felt the first fracture inside me, a small crack where certainty once lived. It whispered that the woman I raised might not be the woman I thought I knew. I turned off the light, carried the cake into the fridge, and decided that tomorrow I would begin to look for answers. I went back to the grocery store the next morning, the cake still sitting untouched in my refrigerator, like a reminder of my own hesitation. The rain had thinned into a mist, the kind that softens the air but never clears. I told myself I needed eggs, but really I needed to see the man with silver hair again. Eli was at the same register, scanning items for a young mother with 2 children tugging at her coat. He looked up when he saw me in line. His eyes flickered with something between recognition and guilt. When it was my turn, I set a small carton of eggs and a loaf of bread on the counter. He scanned them, then leaned forward as though reaching for the register's drawer. Instead, he slid something folded and worn across the counter. A crumpled receipt edges smudged the ink, still sharp enough to read. I glanced down. The list was short but extravagant. A bottle of Bordeaux, 2 pounds of imported seafood, a wedge of cheese I'd only ever seen behind glass cases. All paid in cash. At the bottom, a name stood out written by hand as if to mark ownership, Elias Crow. I whispered it aloud, tasting the strangeness of it. I didn't know anyone by that name. Eli kept his eyes on the scanner. They come in with your daughter often. She doesn't always buy, but she's here. With him. Don't let kindness blind you. The beep of another item from the next register punctuated his warning. My chest tightened. You're certain? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His mouth tightened into something close to pity. I don't say things I'm not sure of. Then louder for anyone listening. That'll be $4.12. I fumbled for cash, pressing a $5 bill into his hand. The receipt felt like it burned against my palm. Outside, the mist had turned to drizzle again. I walked slowly, the eggs and bread forgotten at my side. The name repeated itself in my mind like an echo chamber. Elias Crow. Elias Crow. The sound of it unsettled me, sharp and unfamiliar, like a chord out of tune. Marin had never mentioned anyone by that name. She told me about students' fellow dancers, the occasional friend she met for coffee. But never Elias. Never wine and seafood that cost more than my week's groceries. I paused beneath the awning and unfolded the receipt again. The neat handwriting at the bottom made it personal, intentional, as though someone wanted to leave a trail. And if Eli was telling the truth, Marin was walking that trail beside him. A part of me wanted to march back inside, demand more answers, press Eli, until he told me every detail he had witnessed. But another part held me still. I was already straying into dangerous territory, listening to strangers clutching scraps of paper like evidence. And yet, what else could I do? My daughter had secrets, and the first clue was written in ink I couldn't erase. I tucked the receipt into my coat pocket, its edges crinkling against the lining. My steps carried me toward the bus stop, though I barely noticed the route. I felt shaken, as though the ground beneath me was less steady than yesterday. Marin's red coat flashed in my memory. The envelope, the badge. Now Elias Crow's name stitched itself into that picture, binding them tighter, pulling me deeper into a story I hadn't asked to enter. By the time I reached my apartment, the drizzle had soaked through my sleeves. I unlocked the door, set the bread and eggs on the counter, and pulled the receipt out once more. It was proof, however small, that something was happening beyond the reach of my understanding. And if there was a name, there had to be a face. I didn't have to wait long to see her again. The following Friday, Maureen called to say she was too busy to stop by for dinner. Her voice was brisk, layered with that careful cheerfulness she used when she wanted to close a conversation quickly. I told her it was fine, of course, but after she hung up, I slipped on my coat and left the apartment. The city was slick with rain, every surface reflecting neon streaks from passing cars. I stood beneath the awning of a coffee shop across from her building, waiting. When the front door finally swung open, there she was, my daughter, in the red coat she had worn since her graduate days. Even through the haze of rain, it blazed like a flag. She walked fast, head bent, umbrella unopened, though the drizzle had turned heavy. I followed at a distance, careful to let others blur the line between us. Each block felt longer than the last. She moved with purpose, not the casual drift of someone running errands, but with the rhythm of an appointment she could not miss. Marin turned down a narrow street, lined with lofts repurposed into studios and shared offices. Warm light spilled from tall windows, revealing silhouettes bent over laptops, the new architecture of ambition. She paused at one of the doors, pressed a code into the keypad, and slipped inside. I crossed quickly and pressed myself against the cold brick of the opposite wall. Through the wide window, partly shielded by half-drawn blinds, I could just make out the scene. Marin stood near a table, her damp coat clinging to her shoulders. Across from her sat a woman I had never seen before. She was striking all smooth lines and deliberate poise, with dark hair pinned back and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A leather briefcase rested by her chair, its brass clasp glinting in the light. Even from my distance, she radiated the kind of self-possession money buys. I edged closer, careful not to draw attention. The rain muffled the city noise, sharpening the fragments of sound that escaped through the cracked window. "One more payment," the woman was saying, her voice low but clear enough, "and the account clears." I stiffened. Marin nodded, rubbing her arms as though the coat had suddenly turned cold. "I'll get it to you. Just give me time." The woman leaned forward, her smile stretching wider. "Time is a currency too, my dear. Don't forget who measures it." The briefcase clicked shut. My pulse thudded in my ears. Payment, account. These weren't the word of casual friendship or professional collaboration. They were the language of debt. I watched as Marin gathered her bag, her movements taut, her mouth set in a line I recognized from childhood when she had lost a competition and refused to cry in front of anyone. She hugged the red coat tighter around her frame, then shook the woman's hand. For a fleeting moment, Marin's gaze lifted toward the window, and I shrank back into the shadow of the brick wall. She didn't linger, only glanced as if sensing something, then turned away. Moments later, the woman stood tall and elegant, sweeping the briefcase into her hand as though it weighed nothing. Rain streamed down my forehead, cool and unrelenting. I stayed rooted to the spot, long after they left the loft, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the glass. A mother chasing pieces of a story she wasn't meant to know, piecing together fragments that didn't belong. When I finally pulled myself away, the receipt with Elias Crow's name felt heavier in my pocket, as though it had just gained another companion, a woman with a smile like glass and a ledger I could not yet read. The old brass key rested in the palm of my hand, warm from my skin, though it hadn't been used in years. I'd kept it tucked inside a ceramic dish in my kitchen drawer, one of those just-in-case relics mothers never quite throw away. It was the spare key to Marin's apartment, given back when she first moved out, when I still worried she'd forget her own or lock herself out after a long rehearsal. I stood outside her door now, the key pressing into my lifeline, my breath shallow. On the surface, the hallway looked the same as it always had, pale paint, humming fluorescent light, but the paper taped to Marin's door changed everything. Final notice, it read in bold, impatient letters. Rent past due. My throat tightened. Marin had never said a word. She had told me she was managing the same careful words she used whenever she didn't want me to ask more. All the while, she had been slipping envelopes into the hands of strangers and meeting women with briefcases, while her own home was one notice away from lockout. I slid the key back into my pocket. Not yet. I couldn't bring myself to cross that line while her footsteps still echoed faintly inside. I lingered, listening until the sound of her door opening startled me into retreat. She stepped into the hall, coat slung over her arm, earbuds already in. Her face was tired but composed, as if she had rehearsed looking fine. I pressed myself against the wall near the stairwell until her footsteps faded down the corridor. Only then did I return to the door. The notice fluttered slightly in the draft, whispering its silent accusation. My hand trembled as I fit the key into the lock. The click was louder than I remembered, like the door was objecting to my betrayal. Inside the apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon tea and damp wool. I paused, scanning the space that bore her fingerprint in every corner, the stack of sheet music on the table, the scuffed ballet flats by the couch, the books arranged in careful but haphazard piles. I felt like an intruder in my own daughter's life. I forced myself to move. If I was here, I had to see something, anything that could explain the shadow she was walking under. The bedroom was tidier than I expected. Drawers closed. Bed neatly made a scarf folded on the chair. My eye caught a small desk pushed against the wall. One drawer was locked. The brass knob refused to give when I tugged. I knew I should leave. The shame already burned in my chest, but my fingers itched, desperate for answers. After a few frantic moments of searching, I found a slim metal nail file in her bathroom cabinet. I hesitated only once before pressing it into the lock. To my surprise, it clicked open with little resistance. I pulled the drawer slowly, expecting to find overdue bills or notices stacked like silent screams. Instead, there was only a single envelope. Inside was a photograph our family taken on the porch of our old house. Marin at 12, her father's arm draped around her shoulders, my own smile wide and unguarded in a way it hasn't been in years. On the back, written in Marin's careful hand, were the words, "For Mom. One day you'll know." I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, the photo trembling in my hand. Not bills. Not warnings. Something else entirely. A link I couldn't yet understand between Marin's silence now and the man I had lost long ago. The photograph weighed heavier than the rent notice, heavier than the receipt in my pocket. It carried a promise or a threat I had not been ready to receive. I slid the drawer shut, locked it again, and left the apartment. The image of my husband's steady arm wrapped around Marin, still burning in my mind. Leona answered her phone on the second ring, her voice brisk as always. "You sound winded. What's wrong?" I hadn't meant to call her right away, but the photograph burned in my pocket like a coal I couldn't hold alone. Within an hour, I was at her kitchen table, the faint smell of antiseptic following her from her night shift. She set down 2 mugs of black coffee and fixed me with the look she reserved for stubborn patients. I spilled everything. Eli's warning, the receipt with Elias Crow's name, the woman with the briefcase, and finally, the locked drawer with the family photo. My words tangled and unraveled, more confession than report. Leona listened, her eyes sharp and unsentimental. When I finished, she leaned back, folding her arms across her scrubs. "You're doing it again," she said. "Doing what? Romanticizing. Turning scraps into symbols. A photo isn't an omen, Aveline, it's a photo. You want answers. Stop guessing. Stop weaving fairy tales around every shadow. Track the facts." Her bluntness stung, but it steadied me. She had always been the anchor in our family, the one who didn't flinch at blood or hard truths. "I saw her hand an envelope to a man with a badge," I said quietly. "That isn't a fairy tale." Leona's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Then start there. Who is he? Who is Elias Crow? Who is that Cassandra woman you described? And don't forget the landlord, you said there was a rent notice. That's a paper trail waiting for you." Facts, not fears. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, letting her words sink in. She was right. My days of drifting between memory and suspicion had to end. I couldn't simply hope the truth would reveal itself. Leona pushed a notepad toward me and clicked her pen. "Write it down." So we made a list, 3 names inked in my slanted handwriting: Elias Crow, linked to Marin on a receipt. Cassandra Vale, elegant woman with the briefcase. Landlord, rent notice, possible records. Leona tapped the page with the pen. "That's your map. Follow each lead, see where they cross. And don't drown in guilt about snooping. If Marin's in trouble, she won't thank you for sitting on your hands." Her words lodged in me, half comfort, half warning. I folded the notepad and slid it into my bag. When I left her apartment, the night air smelled of rain-soaked pavement. For the first time, I felt less like a mother grasping at fragments, and more like an investigator charting a path. My heart ached at the thought of betraying Marin's privacy, but the list in my bag felt like the only way forward. By the time I reached home, the decision was made. I would follow the names one by one until the picture of my daughter's hidden life came into focus. When my hands are restless, I bake. It has always been that way. Flour, sugar, and butter are easier to control than the people I love. So the next morning, I found myself cutting squares of lemon bars, the powdered sugar still warm on top. I wrapped them carefully in wax paper, slid them into a tin, and told myself it was just a neighborly gesture. But really, it was a bribe in the softest form I knew. Marin's landlord, Mr. Peterson, lived in the same building he managed. A widower in his 70s, he was known for his stern frown and punctual rent reminders. I knocked on his door, tin in hand. He answered in his usual cardigan, eyes wary, until he saw the lemon bars. "You didn't have to," he said. though his hand moved quickly to accept them. "I know," I replied, with a small smile. But I did. We sat at his tiny kitchen table, the kind with chipped laminate edges. He poured weak coffee into mismatched mugs and bit into one of the bars with the solemn appreciation of a man who rarely indulged. After a few polite words, I leaned forward. "Mr. Peterson, I'm worried about my daughter." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Maren." "Yes." I lowered my voice. "I saw the notice on her door. She hasn't told me anything, but I can't sit back while she drowns. Please, if you know what's going on, I need to understand." He hesitated, then pushed his glasses higher on his nose. Normally, I wouldn't share tenant information. But he glanced at the lemon bar in his hand. "It's not exactly confidential. Rent is rent." He rose and fetched a thick ledger from a drawer, setting it between us. The book smelled faintly of dust and ink. He flipped to Maren's page and I forced myself to breathe evenly. The entries were erratic. Months of nothing followed by sudden, generous payments that wiped out part of the debt, but never all. The sources were listed only as cash drop or anonymous transfer. I traced the dates with my finger. They looked painfully familiar. Each surge of money matched the weeks when Maren had reassured me with those clipped, careful words. "I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry." But the numbers told a different story. Someone else was swooping in at the last minute, covering just enough to keep her afloat, never enough to free her. A cycle of drowning and revival engineered to keep her dependent. Mr. Peterson shook his head. "It's unusual. Most tenants either pay or they don't. With her, it's feast or famine, and always from nameless sources." I swallowed hard. "Do you know who might be sending the money?" He closed the ledger firmly. No names, just envelopes or transfers from accounts that vanish after a month. If you ask me, someone doesn't want to be found. The coffee had gone cold between us, but I hardly noticed. The ledger's weight pressed into me like proof carved in ink. Maren wasn't surviving on her own. Someone was financing her panic drip by drip, keeping her tethered to a debt she couldn't escape. I thanked him, gathered the empty tin, and stepped back into the damp hallway. My chest ached, not just with fear, but with the sharp sting of betrayal, whether hers or someone else's I couldn't yet tell. As I walked out into the rain, the name on that crumpled grocery receipt surfaced again in my mind. Elias Crow. I hadn't spoken to Miro Henley in years. He'd been one of David's closest friends on the force, the kind of man who dropped by for backyard barbecues and laughed too loud at his own jokes. After David's funeral, he stopped coming around, maybe because grief made us both awkward. Still, his number remained tucked in my old address book, written in David's careful block letters. I stared at it for a long time before dialing. Miro Henley. He answered, his voice rough, as if I had caught him mid-thought. "It's Aveline Moraine," I said softly. There was a pause, then a surprised warmth. "Aveline. Well, I'll be damned. It's been, 15 years? "Closer to 20, I said. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. The levity in his tone vanished. "What's going on?" I told him. Not everything, only the parts I could bring myself to say aloud. The envelope in the alley, the receipt with Elias Crow's name, the rent ledger. I left out the locked drawer with the photograph. That secret still pressed too close to my heart. Miro listened without interruption. When I finished, I heard him exhale a long breath, the kind men use when they've already connected dots they'd rather leave unconnected. "Elias Crow," he muttered. "I should have guessed his name would come up. You know him, not personally. He's what we call a clean middleman. Doesn't touch drugs, doesn't push guns, doesn't even jaywalk. But his fingerprints show up in financial cases that stink of laundering. Always just enough distance to keep his hands uncharged. And my daughter," my voice cracked despite myself. "That's the part I don't like. Papers shuffled on his end. Crow works with high-gloss fronts, art galleries, charities, foundations that make the evening news for all the right reasons. You mentioned a woman, Cassandra Vale. Elegant. Smiling like she owned the air. He made a noise that wasn't quite a laugh. Yeah, Cassandra runs a so-called arts foundation. It's on our radar. Money goes in labeled as donations, comes out polished and ready for circulation. She's dangerous because she looks respectable. The kind of respectable juries love. The kitchen clock ticked behind me each second, heavier than the last. Miro Marine is caught up with them. I don't know how or why, but she is. He lowered his voice, each word deliberate. Aveline, listen to me. You are not to approach Crow or Vale. You watch. You take notes. You call me with details. But you don't touch this. You can't fight people like them with lemon bars and good intentions. I gripped the phone tighter. And if watching isn't enough, if she's already drowning, you'll make it worse, he said bluntly. That's how these people survive, by dragging family in. Don't give them that power. You hear me? I closed my eyes, seeing Marin's red coat flash against the rain, hearing her promise that she was managing. Miro's warning rattled against every instinct I had. I can't just watch, I whispered. Silence stretched. Then he sighed. I figured you'd say that. Your husband was the same way. Always stepping in when patience might have saved him. The line crackled as if carrying his weariness across the years. Be careful, Aveline. Whatever you're stepping into, they play for keeps. When we hung up, I sat at the table staring at the notepad Leona had given me. 3 names were scrawled there, but now they pulsed with sharper edges. Elias Crow, Cassandra Vale, Maureen Moraine. And I knew the next step would take me face to face with one of them. It took me 3 days to gather the courage. I pressed one of Leona's old blazers, borrowed a string of pearls from the bottom of my drawer, and practiced ordering coffee without sounding like I was there for anything more than caffeine. The cafe was the kind of place that smelled of roasted chicory, and money the kind of place I never would have set foot in on my own. I had called ahead, pretending to be interested in supporting Cassandra Vale's foundation. The assistant's voice was bright with delight, and before I could change my mind, I was penciled into a meeting with Elias Crow himself. He arrived exactly on time. Tall, well-groomed, the sort of man who seemed poured into his suit rather than dressed in it. He smiled like he owned the room, but didn't need to prove it. Mrs. Moraine, he asked, holding out his hand. The sound of my name startled me, though of course I had given it to the assistant. His grip was warm, his eyes cool. We sat at a corner table near the window, and he ordered wine without asking what I preferred. The waiter nodded as if accustomed to such certainty. I began with rehearsed small talk about the arts, about how I admired foundations that supported dancers and musicians. He listened with the politeness of a man humoring a guest, his attention flicking now and then toward the glass door, as though he had somewhere more important to be. Finally, I asked, "And how does your foundation decide whom to help?" He tilted his head. "We look for resilience, for people who can carry burdens others would collapse under. Art is discipline, Mrs. Moraine. It thrives when tested." His words chilled me, though his tone was smooth. I thought of Marin, of her stubbornness, of the way she'd rather break herself than ask for help. Sometimes, he added, swirling his wine, an artist will sacrifice more than she should. For friends, for family. Sometimes too much. The glass in my hand shook. I steadied it against the tablecloth. He hadn't said her name, but the shape of his words pointed toward her like a compass needle. "You must see that often," I managed. "Oh, more than often," he said lightly. "It is practically a signature of devotion. Admirable, but dangerous. One wonders if anyone ever notices how much they give away." I tried to study his face without flinching. It was practiced neither cruel nor kind, a mask of geniality. yet every syllable felt like he was peeling back layers I hadn't realized were showing. I decided to risk it. And do you think sacrifice is worth the cost? He smiled thinly. That depends on who is paying. The waiter returned with our plates, some delicate arrangement of fish and herbs I couldn't pronounce. My appetite had long since vanished, but I picked at it to keep from revealing my unease. Elias ate neatly, unhurried, as though we were discussing the weather. Halfway through, he leaned back, folding his napkin beside the plate. You remind me of your husband. David was a man who believed too much in the righteousness of effort. I always admired that. My fork froze in midair. I hadn't spoken David's name. Not once. You know my husband. He brushed a crumb from his cuff. Not personally, but Portland is small, reputations live long, and widows, especially careful ones, are noticed more than they realize. The air seemed to thin around me. He had circled me neatly, slipping my past into the present without giving me a thread to follow. When the bill came, he signed with a flourish and rose. It was a pleasure, Mrs. Moraine. Do keep in touch. Artists flourish best when families understand the scope of their commitment. He left me sitting there, pearls heavy around my throat, fish untouched wine burning in my stomach. By the time I stepped outside, the drizzle had turned to steady rain. His words clung to me as sharply as the damp air. He knew exactly who I was. And that meant he wasn't just circling Marin. He was circling me, too. The evening after my meeting with Elias, I told myself I wouldn't look for Marin. I promised I'd give her space, let her life breathe without my shadow hovering. But promises are fragile things when worry gnaws at you. By dusk, I found myself walking the familiar blocks near her apartment umbrella, tucked against the drizzle. The glow of a cafe window spilled across the sidewalk, and through it, I saw her, my daughter, sitting at a small table near the back. She leaned forward, her face lit by the pale blue light of her phone. I nearly turned away. But then I noticed something that froze me in place. It wasn't the phone I'd seen her carry before. This one was smaller, darker, held with a careful tension like a secret she didn't want the world to touch. I stepped inside the bell above the door, chiming softly. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. I bought a tea I didn't want and sat 2 tables away, angled just enough to watch. Marin's lips moved quickly, her eyes darting toward the window. She smiled a sharp, fleeting smile I didn't recognize, then lowered her voice. I caught fragments, not words, but tones, the cadence of someone negotiating. She noticed me only when she looked up to stir her drink. Her face brightened instantly, as though a mask had slipped into place. Mom, what are you doing here? I forced a smile. Couldn't sleep? Thought a cup of tea might help. She slipped the dark phone into her bag with a practiced motion. The bright phone, her usual one, appeared in her hand almost seamlessly. I was just finishing up. Late-night yoga class after this. Yoga, I asked. She nodded too quickly. Helps with the stress. But when she bent to gather her bag, the second phone slipped partly into view again. The screen lit briefly before she pushed it down. I glimpsed a message in stark white letters. Transfer complete. Next cover story. The words branded themselves into my mind. I held my breath, waiting for her to look up and notice I had seen. But she only smiled that easy smile again, the one meant to reassure. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Get some rest, Mom. She kissed my cheek lightly, her hair damp with rain, and walked out into the night. The red coat fluttered behind her, bright against the wet dark. I sat frozen in my chair, the tea cooling, untouched. My daughter had a second life stitched into her bag, one she thought she could hide from me with talk of yoga and stress relief. My heart wrestled with itself. Was she lying to protect me, or simply to protect herself? The screen of that phone had spoken louder than she had. Transfer complete. Money was moving. Next cover story. Lies were planned. Smooth, deliberate lies. I left the cafe an hour later, tea still full umbrella forgotten in the corner. The drizzle clung to my hair as I walked home every step, weighed by the knowledge that Maureen could lie with such ease and smile while doing it. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever game she was in, it was no longer only hers to play. The rain hadn't let up, but I boarded the evening bus to Seattle anyway, my coat heavy with damp, and my thoughts heavier still. Cassandra Vail was listed as keynote speaker at a charity gala, a glittering fundraiser for the arts. It seemed the sort of stage where she could show her face without fear. I wanted to see her away from the shadows of rented lofts and whispered deals. The hotel lobby gleamed like a mirror, all marble floors and chandeliers that threw fractured light across gowns and tuxedos. My shoes squeaked faintly as I entered, drawing glances that told me I did not belong. I clutched my thrift store clutch and lifted my chin, pretending confidence I did not feel. Then I saw her. Cassandra wore white silk that floated around her like a second skin. A diamond pin anchored her hair, and her smile was the kind that softened every barrier in a room. She shook hands, laughed with senators posed for photos beside a backdrop stamped with her foundation's logo. No one here saw a predator. They saw an angel of culture. I lingered at the edge of the ballroom, sipping sparkling water that tasted faintly of dust. I reminded myself not to be fooled by silk and diamonds. Still, something about her face gnawed at me, a tug of recognition I couldn't place. It wasn't until I heard her laugh, low, polished, practiced, that memory struck. David, my late husband. I remembered his retirement party at the precinct, the chatter of colleagues, the hum of laughter from the adjoining bar. He had introduced me to a young woman, then elegant even in a simple dress, who praised his work and asked questions about the cases he'd closed. Her name had slid away from me, then unimportant at the time. But now, seeing Cassandra, I knew. She had been there. I gripped the rim of my glass until my hand trembled. Had David known what she was, even then, had she already been circling our family, waiting for the right moment? The gala music swelled. Cassandra drifted toward a side table, speaking to a tall man with cropped hair. I edged closer, keeping myself hidden behind a column of orchids. Her voice carried just enough. The widow's watching, she murmured, lips still curved in a gracious smile. Let her. The words sliced through me. Not a widow. The widow. My knees went weak, and I steadied myself against the cold marble. She had seen me. She had known I was here all along. I wasn't sneaking into her world. I had been invited in a manner of speaking. Her companion glanced over his shoulder, eyes scanning the room until they brushed mine. I pulled back behind the orchid's breath caught in my throat. Cassandra's laugh drifted again, lighter now, as though nothing in the world troubled her. In that moment, I realized I was not simply a mother, poking her nose where it didn't belong. I was part of their theater, a character in a performance I hadn't agreed to. My watching wasn't threatening them. It was serving them. I left the ballroom before the speeches began, the chandeliers glittering cruelly above me. Outside, the rain felt colder, sharper. I hurried down the slick streets, her words echoing with every step. The widow's watching. Let her. I had thought I was following trails, uncovering truths, but Cassandra had turned the lens back on me. I was no longer just the observer. I was part of their game. Sleep would not come after Seattle. Cassandra's words clung to me, taut strings pulling at every breath. I sat at my kitchen table long past midnight, the rain drumming on the windows, a stack of old letters spread before me. They were Marin's letters, written when she was a teenager after David's death. I had kept them bundled in a ribbon hidden in the bottom drawer of my dresser. Some children scribble secrets in diaries. Mine wrote them for me, even though she never expected I'd save them. Her handwriting, then, was bold, slanted, pressed into the paper as though she needed to carve permanence into fragile sheets. One note read, "Mom, you tell me to be strong, but it's hard to breathe when everyone looks at us like we're broken. I hate pity. I hate walking into school and feeling like everyone sees a shadow behind me instead of me. I'll work harder. I'll win scholarships. I'll dance until no one remembers the funeral." I pressed the page to my chest. Brave words, yes, but bitter too. Marin had built herself into armor after her father's death. Even then, she was learning to hide fear behind discipline. Another letter folded in half. "Sometimes I think if I could trade places with Dad, I would. You're so tired all the time. I want to take care of things, but I don't know how. Maybe when I'm older I'll know." The edges blurred as my eyes watered. She had carried responsibility too early, shouldering weight that should have been mine alone. I thought of my own secrets, the debts after my heart surgery, the months when I quietly sold heirlooms to cover copays. I never told her. I didn't want Marin to know how fragile her mother's life had become. I told myself the silence was protection, not deception. But now, staring at her letters, I wondered if Marin's path was born from that silence. Had she learned from me that survival required secrecy? That sacrifice must be hidden behind reassurances. If she was tangled with Elias Crow and Cassandra Vale out of loyalty, trying to shield me as I once shielded her, then our lives were mirrors. A mother keeping secrets for love, a daughter doing the same. I smoothed the papers back into their bundle. My chest ached with both pride and fear. Pride that she was strong enough to endure, fear that strength had twisted into something darker. I slid the ribbon tight, tucked the letters back into the drawer, and pressed my palm to the wood. Secrets were meant to protect, but sometimes they became cages. When I finally rose, the night was thinning into pale morning. My apartment felt smaller than ever, crowded, not with furniture, but with echoes. David's laughter, Marin's letters, Cassandra's silken whisper. I knew then I could no longer bear silence. Whatever truth Marin had tied herself to, I had to untangle it before it strangled us both. The rain eased as I reached for my coat, as though the city itself were holding its breath for what came next. I set the table with more care than usual, though it was only tea. The lemon bars had gone stale, so I cut fresh slices of pear, arranging them in a circle on my grandmother's plate. I wanted the moment to feel gentle, not like an interrogation. Still, my hands trembled when I poured the boiling water into the pot. Marin arrived in her red coat cheeks, flushed from the cold, her smile tired, but bright enough to mask whatever shadows trailed her. She kissed my cheek and slipped into her chair, looking around my small apartment with the fondness of someone who remembered it better than she liked to admit. "It smells like chamomile in here," she said. "You always oversteep it." Some habits, I answered softly, are hard to break. We spoke of ordinary things first, the rain, her classes, the new bakery she had tried near the waterfront. Her laugh came easily, but her eyes flicked often toward her bag, the one I knew held more than just books and makeup. I waited until the tea had cooled enough to sip before I asked. "Marin," I said gently, "who is Elias Crow?" The name landed like a stone between us. Her hand halfway to the pear plate stilled. She looked at me sharply, then away. "Where did you hear that name?" "I met him," I confessed. "At a cafe. He knew your name, and mine." Her jaw tightened. For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly, "You shouldn't have done that." "I had to," I whispered. "I saw you with a second phone, Marin." I saw the message. "Transfer complete. Next cover story." Her eyes flashed anger and fear colliding. "You were spying on me. I was watching." I corrected, though. The difference felt thin on my tongue. "Because you won't tell me what's happening." She set her cup down with deliberate care. "I can't tell you. Not yet." Then at least tell me why. Why you, of all people, are tangled with them. Her shoulders squared the same way they did when she faced auditions steeling herself for rejection. Because I'm protecting someone. The words cut through the room like a blade. Who, I asked, though I already knew she would not answer. She shook her head. If I tell you, it won't protect them anymore. It'll put you in danger too. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. Her skin was warm, trembling faintly. Maren, I've spent my life trying to protect you. Don't you see? You don't have to carry this alone. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. I can't, Mom. Please trust me this once. The silence that followed was heavier than words pressing into my chest until it ached. I wanted to scream, to demand names and reasons to shake the truth out of her. Instead, I squeezed her hand. I'll be here when you're ready, I said. She looked at me, then truly looked as if weighing whether I was an ally or another burden. Finally, she nodded, pulled her hand back, and reached for a slice of pear as though nothing had been spoken at all. We finished our tea in near silence. The pears grew brown at the edges, uneaten. When she rose to leave, her red coat seemed brighter than ever, a flare of defiance against the gray drizzle outside. And I was left at the table wondering who she was protecting fiercely enough to risk her mother's trust. Miro met me at a quiet diner on the east side of town, the sort of place where the booths had long since lost their spring and the waitresses knew his name. He slid a small device across the table, sleek, discreet nothing, like the clunky recorders I remembered from David's years on the force. Legal clean, he said in his gravel voice. As long as you're present, it's admissible. But you'd better be careful. Cassandra Vale doesn't scare easily. My hand hovered above the device. And Maren. His eyes softened. If she's already inside their circle, this might be the only way to get her out. 2 nights later, I clipped the recorder inside my coat pocket and positioned myself at a crowded co-working gallery where Cassandra's Foundation was hosting a community showcase. The space buzzed with chatter students displaying paintings, photographers showing slides. Underneath the bright chatter tension curled in my stomach. Maren arrived in her red coat, her face set, with the practiced calm I now recognized as armor. Cassandra drifted in moments later, all silk and diamonds, her smile commanding every glance in the room. I stayed close enough to the displays to blend in, but near enough to catch their voices. The recorder hummed against my side. You've done well, Cassandra murmured, her tone velvet but firm. The transfers look seamless. No one suspects a thing when money wears the mask of art. Maren shifted, arms crossed. These projects aren't art, they're camouflage. I know what I signed up for. Cassandra's smile sharpened. You signed because you had no choice. Protecting someone is expensive business. I felt the blood drain from my face. Protecting someone. Maren's voice cracked just enough to betray her. Lyric deserves a chance. She's 17, she has talent, and without the papers they'll send her back. I couldn't let that happen. Lyric, Cassandra repeated, savoring the name like a test. The girl who paints in fire escapes, yes. Beautiful work, tragic story. You traded your freedom for hers. Noble. Foolish, but noble. Maren stiffened. I'll pay what I owe. Cassandra's laugh was soft-cutting. You'll pay as long as I say you owe. That's the nature of debt. The room buzzed with polite applause for a student's sculpture, masking the silence pounding in my ears. Maren hadn't been selling herself out of greed or even ambition. She had chained herself to Cassandra's machine to shield a child from being thrown out of the only home she had known. I pressed a hand against my coat pocket, ensuring the recorder was still humming, capturing every word. Miro's warning echoed in me, watch, don't touch. But watching felt like drowning when it was my daughter caught in the current. Marin's eyes darted across the room, almost as if she sensed me there. I ducked behind a row of easels, my breath shallow. Cassandra laid a hand on Marin's arm, the gesture light but unmistakably possessive. "Remember," Cassandra whispered, "every lie you tell is another thread in the net. Don't tug too hard, or it will close tighter." The recorder caught it all, the promise, the threat, the cage of debt wrapped in silk. And I knew, as the applause swelled again, that Marin's noble lie had bound her to a truth far more dangerous than either of us could bear alone. I waited until Marin came by for Sunday tea again. The pears had spoiled, so I set out simple toast and honey, my hands steady, only because I forced them to be. She took her usual seat coat, still damp from the rain eyes, rimmed with exhaustion. Before she could ask about my day, I slid the small recorder across the table. Her face drained of color. "Mom," she whispered. "What did you do?" I pressed play. Cassandra's voice filled the small kitchen, smooth and poisonous. "You traded your freedom for hers. Noble. Foolish, but noble." Marin shut her eyes as if the words struck like blows. When the recording ended, the silence pressed harder than the rain outside. "I had no choice," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Lyric would have been deported. She's just a kid, Mom. No one else would help." Cassandra promised if I stood in, if I took the papers, Lyric would stay. I thought sacrificing myself was the only option. Her hands shook as she reached for her tea. I caught them in mine. "You are not alone in this anymore." Tears welled, but she shook her head. "It's too late. I'm tied to her. Every transfer, every account, my name is on them. I'm the legal holder. If this blows up, the evidence leads straight to me." My chest tightened. She wasn't just trapped, she was branded with Cassandra's mark. "Then we use that," I said, though. Fear scraped at my throat. "The gala next month, you'll be there. We'll give Miro the recording. Let him pair it with the accounts. Cassandra's empire looks spotless until the rot leaks through. If you stand in the light, she has to fall." Marin's eyes searched mine, disbelief and hope tangled together. "But if I stand in the light, they'll see me too? Then we'll plan carefully," I whispered. "Expose her. Not you. I won't let her feed on you any longer." For a long moment she said nothing, just gripped my hands as though anchoring herself to shore. At last she nodded, the smallest of gestures, but enough. The rain eased against the windows. Our tea had gone cold untouched. Yet for the first time in weeks, I felt the air shift, fear still thick, but joined by something sharper, something close to resolve. And in the quiet, I knew the next steps would draw us both into Cassandra's fire. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and gold-trimmed linens, every surface polished to a brightness that mocked the weight in my chest. Marin stood beside me in her red coat, draped like a shield, her face calm, but her fingers clenched around the edge of her clutch. We had rehearsed this moment a dozen times, but rehearsals never prepare you for reality. Cassandra swept onto the stage in her signature white gown, the room parting for her presence. Cameras clicked. Glasses chimed. The music softened into silence. She began her speech with the practiced grace of someone who had made lying an art form. Words about nurturing young artists and the sacred duty of patrons rolled over the audience like velvet smoke. Then the screen behind her flickered. Instead of slides of smiling dancers and painted canvases, the audio spilled into the room. Her own voice, velvet turned venom. "You traded your freedom for hers." Noble. Foolish, but noble. Gasps broke across the tables. The recording looped clear and damning. Next came the ledger projections transfers, marked in bold numbers, dates aligning with sudden bursts of cash. The room dissolved into chaos, phones lifted high, live streams spreading before security could stop them. Cassandra's mask cracked. She snapped at the technician, but the evidence kept rolling. Her composure shattered. She bolted from the stage white gown, flashing like a ghost through the crowd. I turned in time to see Elias slip through a side door toward the kitchen, a folder clutched tight. Moments later, he reappeared, his voice cutting through the panic. This woman. He pointed toward Marin, who froze under the sudden spotlight. She's the one who signed. She holds the accounts. These documents prove it. He waved papers above his head. Signatures scrawled across them. My daughter's name forged in careful imitation. Gasps shifted suspicion, turning like a tide. Security surged forward, sweeping Cassandra, Elias, and Marin alike into the circle of accusation. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing everything. My chest burned as if someone had reached in and clenched my lungs. I shoved my way past gowns and tuxedos, ignoring the hands that tried to block me. "Look at the notes," I shouted, my voice raw. "The ledger annotations, check them. My daughter's handwriting never matches. You're being shown forgeries." For a moment, the crowd wavered, torn between spectacle and truth. Security halted, flipping through pages, murmurs rising as the differences became clear. The forged script, neat uniform wrong, could never pass for the hurried scrawl I had seen on Marin's grocery lists and childhood letters. Elias faltered his charm, curdling under the harsh light of scrutiny. Cassandra's name hissed through the room like a curse, cameras catching her pale face as she was pulled back inside. Marin stood silent, trembling, but upright, the red coat bright against the swirl of chaos. She didn't look at me, not yet, but I saw the faintest spark of release in her eyes, the smallest crack in the chains she had carried alone. And as security pressed them all toward the back corridors, the ballroom erupted into a frenzy of questions, shouts, and flashing lights. The truth was out, but whether it would free her or destroy her in public, I could not yet tell. The ballroom emptied into chaos. Guests spilled onto the steps, tuxedos damp in the night drizzle, heels clicking against marble as reporters swarmed like crows. Sirens cut through the air, blue and red lights painting the rain. I held Marin's hand as officers moved past us, their radios crackling. Elias stood cuffed against a squad car, his once polished calm shattered into shouting protests no one believed. Cassandra, hem of her white gown streaked with mud, raised her chin at the cameras. But the flashbulbs carved her into the villain she was. Her diamonds glared back at her, cold and merciless. Marin sagged against me, shoulders shaking. I thought lies would save people. She whispered words, broken with sobs. I thought if I carried them, no one else would have to. But they nearly ruined us. I pulled her close, my cheek against her damp hair. Silence is not strength, I told her. It's surrender, and you're stronger than surrender. She wept harder, then not from fear, but from the release of carrying too much for too long. Around us, the city swirled with sirens and reporters. But in that moment, it was only mother and daughter clinging to what truth we still had. When the arrests were made, statements taken, and crowds thinned, the rain softened into mist. Marin and I walked away from the hotel. Side by side, our steps, slow, our hands joined tightly as dawn began to tint the horizon. The street smelled of wet asphalt and something new, something like relief. Weeks later, the roses bloomed outside my Portland flat. I planted them myself, knees in the dirt, fingers aching with the effort, but steady with purpose. Each stem rooted deeper than the last, a reminder that even fragile things can grow stronger after storms. Inside, I kept Marin's spare key in a drawer. Not to intrude, not to break into her life, but to be ready should she ever need to come home, should she ever choose to open the door, not with secrecy, but with trust. As I wiped the soil from my hands, I thought of all we had survived. Lies whispered, debts forged, truths finally spoken. and I knew the hardest choice still remained. Because when love is tested by betrayal, the question lingers sharper than any blade: do you guard the gate forever, or open it again, wiser than before?